So, do you have any ideas on how businesses can do this in a way that's sustainable and long lasting?
Yeah, that's a really, really tough question. I'm going to say I don't want to punt your question too much, but I think the cynic or the short answer to your question is show me the money. I still think money is a big driver in the sustainability aspects of some of these things. Tenzi Whalen, the professor at Stern, who is really well known for making a business case for sustainability and particularly around like, focusing on ESG, social impact in general. So she's a really good person to talk to. I won't pretend to know a lot of I don't want to spout off things that I don't know or can't back up very well. But clearly there is a business case to be made. And I think we have to keep making it. But back to my original point that I made before, I think with the perception that we're seeing shift and with such a strong critical eye that the public seems to have on a lot of our companies, I feel like that is becoming more and more of a reality that critical eye is affecting the bottom line of these companies, and it will actually foster change more quickly. So I think that those are some of the things that I think are, it's such a cliche answer, but I still think that's, we're getting there. I think we're really getting there to a point where companies will not and cannot survive if they're not consistently doing the right thing.
Mm.
Because we're paying attention. And even if they do a million right things and they do one wrong thing, we're still on them for that wrong thing. And I think, you know what, let's hold each other, including me, accountable, right? Like, I love it.
Yeah. So other than like the bottom line you mentioned, have you noticed like any other like prominent issues you've seen facing like leadership or management in these businesses or nonprofits that's really trying to make a social impact?
Yeah, I do think that's a great question. I think a lot of the clients that I've worked with in the past year, maybe even 2 to 3 years, I think if I could, I mean, everyone has their own challenges, but I think if I were to sum up a trend for you, I would say scaling is a huge challenge for a lot of these companies. Many of them have been able to get startup capital. Most of them seem to find a niche, especially if they're doing really cool and innovative things in a space that does have a social focus. So I don't think there's, again, I've worked with so many small businesses that have been able to take the first step and actually sustain 1 or 2 employees and actually get a pretty good return on some of the investments they put into their organization. And then they want to make it at a company that has like 100 employees or like 500 employees. And suddenly they all seem to hit the sort of wall where it's like, it's been super, super challenging in so many different ways. And many of them have not been able to do it.
So, there's a misconception that social impact and a career in business are two separate things. Do you have any advice or motivating words for students who want to incorporate these two areas into their career plans?
Yeah, sure. I think you're right. I think there's definitely this idea that you have to make a choice. There's this idea that it's like, I mean, and sure, I get that, lots of people have to make choices. I don't want to diminish that idea, but I'm going to go back to what I said at the very beginning, because I really believe in this. This is maybe the thesis of my life moving forward as I work with students, which is, again, consistently being able to ask yourself, what is your value? What do I bring to the table? Right. And again, to whom am I bringing that value? If you can ask that question, and I think it's hard to have an answer to that when you're like 20 or 21. A lot of people, that's a challenge, right? And I'm not suggesting that it's easy, but I think if you consistently, like every day, ask that question, over time, you'll be able to have an answer to that question, and you'll start to believe it yourself, right? We are our own biggest barriers to being able to have like a job that pays the bills and a job that makes impact, or a life that does those things, if we can't do both at the same time, since maybe it is a choice for some folks. So I think if you can really define what your value is and what you bring to the table and to whom, and you start to believe it, then you start to really get focused on, all right, how am I making that happen? Is it through the job that I'm doing now? Does that require grad school? Do I make a job shift? Am I doing something in my spare time that really fills that void? Over time, those ideals of like who you are, becomes so part of who you are that it's like it rattles off your tongue. And then someone will meet you and be like, oh, you're the perfect person to do X, Y, and Z. And before you know it, you are doing something that both pays the bills and creates the impact if you can't do that already. Or maybe that's not your path and you still are able to say, this is what I do. Like I work as an investment banker and I help blah, 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 blah. And like, maybe that's what you're doing. I just feel like sometimes we force this choice and we don't ask that question. And I think one thing that I will very clearly admit, I think this asking yourself what your value is, right? I think I think that someone who's a white older male who comes from, a financially stable home has many more options to ask themselves the question, what is my value? And I think in some cases, the world sometimes answers that question, sometimes more quickly or makes that a little bit more quick to figure out, or they respond and echo it back to you very quickly. So I do recognize that for some folks, that is not like the simple, quick question. But what I will say is, I would say being like, say, an older white male from a financially stable background, I would say that the idea of asking myself what my value is and getting that answer, I don't think that the privilege was so much about getting that answer more quickly. I think that the privilege comes with actually asking the question in the first place. And I think that if we encourage everyone to like sit back and ask that question, because, the world asks me that question and responds very quickly and sometimes leaves other people out. And so I just think that if we push everyone to ask that question for themselves, and the more you say it and the more you think about it and the more you answer it and maybe even ask it out loud to others and get their feedback, we start to really feel confident that we are that person. We do bring that value. And before you know it, you aren't the biggest barrier to why that's not happening, and it's going to happen. I really believe that. And I know that sounds a little bit like we're all holding hands and running in the meadow, but I think that I've worked with so many students. I also work with faculty who are older. And I will tell you that so many people that I know, they can't answer that question, even at the age of like 45 or 50, or even older, let alone at the age of 20, 25. And that's the barrier. And so, you deserve to ask that question. You deserve to ask it to others. You deserve to hear a response, and you deserve to like ruminate and think about it and come up with like who you are. And anyway, now I'm becoming a little too cheesy, but I just think that this is so important. And I'll leave you with that. I think that that's like, that's key. Asking that question every day and looking in a mirror and saying it, because no one else may be asking you and nobody else may be giving you that validation. And if that's not happening, you still deserve to be able to ask those questions.
All right, well, we want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to speak with us and share your insights to the empowered community. So yes, this is the end of the interview. So thank you so much for coming on and speaking to us today.
Thank you for having me. It was great to see you both.
Yes. If you want to learn more about Professor Hansen, you can take some of his classes or check out Social Impact Scholars.
Or just email Ryan and he'll just tell you everything you need to know. And no, please, I would love to work with any and all of you in any context if possible. I'd love to see you in class or otherwise. And I'm definitely someone who's willing to chat outside of whether you're my students or not. So please reach out and I'm happy to talk.